Dave Smith masterfully explains trade and basic economics.
Over and over again and doing different things. Like I get one opportunity today to work for it. Economic model, it's just you. Like let's say it's you and you have a plot of land or something like that, and so you wanna build a house. Now think of this in the most primitive sense. You're gonna cut down trees to build a log cabin. Okay, that is an economic activity. That is, you're transforming natural goods into an economic good. So you're cutting down trees that just naturally grow and are just there. And it's what man is born into, like a world with nature and trees. And you're gonna chop these trees down. You're gonna build a log cabin, as many people used to do, crazy as it sounds. So what you're gonna do now is you're going to essentially invest your labor into transforming this natural good into a house. Now, the trees served you, no real purpose before. I mean, maybe you could pick fruit from them or whatever, but the trees themselves were just there. And now you have a house that provides you and your family shelter. Okay, so you went into you worked for a desired outcome that you achieved by your work. So now you have, whatever, when animals can't get to you, you're a little bit warmer. When it rains, you don't get as wet. Okay. So that is like, basically that's almost the start of an economy, you could say. Picking fruit is an economic activity. Building a chair or a table, raising animals, like all of this stuff is like, now you're working in order to achieve a desired outcome with scarcity in the mix. So the next step, right? Like the next most basic step in economics after this kind of low level, you turning natural goods into economic goods, is trade. And trade explodes economic possibilities. And so, by the way, I should just aside for a second, I'm not in any way, if you're getting ahead of me and going, yeah, but this gets much more complicated once governments and nations and all these things come into play. I'm not arguing with that. That is the case. I'm just saying this is still the underlying basics of it, and it's worth understanding. So yes, it gets much more complicated when you have a government and there's a foreign nation and they have a government. There's more components to it, but just to understand the basics so we kind of know what we're talking about when we're talking about the more complicated shit. Trade is like a multiplier effect, because we're all limited by the by the scarcity of time and energy. We're also limited by the scarcity of our own abilities, and different people have different abilities, and different people have chose to do different things with their scarce time. And so as we all kind of note on some level, right? So let's just say you are now, you built yourself a log cabin, and you were very good at that. You built yourself a good log cabin. And then there's another guy who doesn't know how to build log cabins, but he is really good at raising cattle or whatever. And so he's got food, and you know how to build a house. Now you are in desperate need of food, and he is in desperate need of shelter. When you guys trade, what you're able to do is saying, rather than you having to learn a whole new skill of cattle raising and him having to learn a whole new skill of building a house, you go, okay, here, let's make a trade. I'll build you a house. I'll do the thing I'm really good at if you feed me and my family for a year. You make a voluntary trade where you both benefit from the expertise of the other person, and you both get something out of it. Now, it's important to keep in mind that if the trade is voluntary, right? Like if you're not being forced to make this deal, but you're voluntarily making the deal, then by definition, at least your expectation is that this is beneficial for you. So it's not as if the cattle raiser and it's not as if there's a loser in this deal. The expectation from both people is that they'll both be better off. And if you could think, as you kind of scale this up and get closer and closer to what's like a full economy, you could understand how profound that impact of trade is. And that fact, it is impossible to have anything even approaching what we might consider prosperity without that. There's no conceivable way to actually prosper without a lot of different people's expertise and knowledge and their own unique situations all kind of being fused together in this voluntary exchange. You know, as I sit here in my studio and just look around, I mean, it's like unbelievable the amount of knowledge that is all around us. Now, the great old example, I think Murray Rothbard had one where he did this with a ham sandwich, but the most famous one came from, well, it came from Leonard Read's I, Pencil essay, but then I think probably the most famous version of it was Milton Friedman's like thing that he did on the pencil. And this is, it really is like, it's a simple thing. It's kind of something that we all know on some level, but it's really worth thinking about if you want to attempt to understand economics. And so the pencil thing is basically that Milton Friedman, I think he made this back in the 70s. It might have been the 80s. I think it was the 70s. Or he basically holds up a pencil and he's like, okay, this is a pencil. Now let's like go through what it actually takes to be a pencil, because the truth is that there is no human being alive and there's never been a human being that can make a pencil. There's no one person who can do it. Now, Milton Friedman's talking about it and he goes, okay, so this is a pencil. Okay, so here's the point, which is, you know, a lot of people think it's lead, but it's actually made of graphite. Graphite is in the ground. In order to get graphite out of the ground, you need this like machinery. In order to have this machinery, you need like, there are so many steps when you actually think about it that like you need to figure out how to mine for these things. You need to build the machinery that's going to go into it. You need to build, like, there's so much knowledge, and we are only dealing with the graphite. We haven't even gotten to like the wood. In order to produce the wood, in order to produce the little rubber eraser at the end, okay, you need this whole process to make rubber. And the more you get into it, the more you realize that there has never existed a human being who has the knowledge to make a pencil. Like the simplest thing we think of, it's like all of these different like thousands and thousands of different areas of expertise all have to come together in order to create a pencil. And if you were to just say it like that, you might think to yourself, you'd be like, so what does a pencil go for? Like $1 million? Like, this is incredible. This is a marvel. It's like, it's all these different people's knowledge and work and labor and wisdom all coming together to make this little thing. This must be crazy expensive. And you'd be like, no, it costs like 5 cents. And if you saw one broken on the street, you wouldn't think twice before you just walked over it. And like, okay, that in itself is amazing, you know. And I understand that like this is something we all take for granted and we probably should, but when you're really trying to think about these things, I think it's worth it to kind of appreciate that it is amazing. These are miracles of human creation that we all throughout our day take. And this is just the pencil, by the way. And the reason you use the pencil as the example is because this is the simplest thing. I mean, if you think that's impressive about a pencil, wait until you get into like, you know, a furnace or whatever, you know, like things that are way more complicated, that take way more expertise and way more knowledge. And, you know, Joe Rogan used to have a joke back in the day that was it was a great bit on Talking Monkeys in Space, where he was just talking about how we all feel smart because we use smart people stuff, you know, and there's a real illusion that you can create for yourself there. And his joke was just how we use smartphones and computers, and but none of us have any idea how they work or how to create. And he goes, I think the punchline of the joke was, if I left you in the woods with an axe, how long before you could send an email? You know, but like, it's a really funny joke, but it's a very intelligent comment, because you start to realize just like the answer to that is it's impossible. I could give you 100,000 years with an axe in the woods, and how long before you can send an email? The answer is you'll never get there. It's just impossible for one person to get there. But when you got, you know, millions and millions and millions of people, in this case billions of people, all trading together, these miracles are possible. And this is not, again, none of this is an opinion. This is a just a description of how the world works. And so when you have this dynamic where through trade, it's this crazy multiplier effect where we're able to level up and level up and level up. And even a person who has crazy expertise in some area that you have no knowledge of, they still only have one of those areas down. And of course, as an economy grows more and more and more, what you have is more and more specialization, less and less general knowledge, but more and more specialization, because the more people specialize, like if they're much better at their very narrow little area, and then they can trade with other people who are really good at very narrow areas, now we can all have the benefits of everybody's narrow area of expertise. And you just have to look around your house. You are surrounded right now by thousands of examples of this that are truly amazing. They're miracles. And it's like, this is something that we take for granted. It's kind of good in a way that we take it for granted, because then it allows us to focus on other things so we can keep leveling up. But this is like very basically how economies start and grow, and how, you know what I'm saying? Like how they start at a very primitive level and then grow into what is a modern economy. It's from different people having their different levels of expertise and everybody trading with each other. Now, of course, back to my primitive example, right? And this is where, like, I think everybody kind of knows this on some level, but this is where currency comes in. Is like, okay, it's one thing when you're trading, like my example of where you're trading with your neighbor, you know, log cabins for cattle or whatever. And you can make these any example you want. One guy's really good at building chairs, you know, the other guy is really good at fixing roofs or whatever. Now that works really well if your neighbor needs a chair and you need your roof fixed, but sometimes, you know, your neighbor needs a chair and you need something to eat. And he's like, well, I can't fix it. And then you would have to go find someone who has food and needs a chair. Whereas if you have currency, you don't need to worry about that, because you can just give that person currency, which represents kind of like a unit of your value. They can take that and go get what they need. So you can build them a chair, get money for it, and then go buy food from someone who has food. So that's another kind of multiplier effect, like that lets you, that facilitates trade. So you have this store of value now. That's the idea of money. You have a store of value, and that you can trade your labor for this value and then trade that value for whatever you want. I guess it should also be, since we're getting into the basics of this, talking about trade here, and now that money has come in, right? If you are trading money for goods, you now have what is known today as a trade deficit. There's an imbalance in trade, they'll call it sometimes. But again, that's all kind of an artificial concept. If, for example, like I have a huge trade deficit with my supermarket. Like I go there, okay, fine, my wife goes there, but regardless, as a family, we go there, some member of our family goes there and gives them money for food. Every week we're doing this. And they never give us money for anything. They've never bought anything from our family. We always just buy from them. But you could see, like in that example, it would be silly to think that because there's a trade deficit that somehow they're ripping me off. Like that's just not, it's a voluntary trade. It's just like the two guys trading where it's a win-win relationship. It's the same thing when you go there. And the obvious reason for that is that my supermarket wants the money more than they want the food. They have an abundance of food and they're trying to trade it for money. I have money and I want something to eat. So I'm happy to trade my money for food. We both expect to be better off. So that's how trade works, right? Now, if I were to look at that and say, oh, I'm running up this huge trade deficit with my supermarket because they're not buying anything from me, but I'm buying a lot of stuff from them, you can already see where that just doesn't make any sense. That's not a real issue. And there isn't, in fact, a deficit because I've been trading with them for something that I wanted more than the money. It was a voluntary transaction. And if you were, let's go through another scenario here, maybe even back to the more primitive economic transaction. Let's say, you've got some chickens and you're trading eggs and your neighbor has some berries and your neighbor's like, you're like, look, me and my family have all the eggs we need. We have all the eggs we can eat and then some, but we'd really love some berries with our eggs. and the neighbor is like, we have all the berries we could eat, maybe then some, we'd really love some eggs, that obviously you could see you guys could come together and make a win-win trade where you're both better off for making this trade. Now, let's say your neighbor, he's trading you eggs and you're giving him berries, and you were like, hey, I'll give you 50 berries for 10 eggs. And he goes, nah, you know what? Just give me 30. Don't even worry about the 50. Give me 30. Let's say he lowers his prices. Okay. Is there any conceivable way where you could say, oh, he's ripping me off. He's ripping me off by charging less? No, right? You'd have to acknowledge that he's only helping you by charging less. Like, even if you don't want the extra berries, even if you threw them in the trash, it's still the same thing for you as if he charged you the full thing. Charging less is not ripping you off. In the same way, if my supermarket were to say, hey, we're lowering the price of groceries, there's no conceivable way that you would say like, oh, this is a dirty game you're playing, ripping me off here. So I've heard it, and I remember Bob Murphy said this years ago when he was doing a debate on free trade versus protectionism, that, you know, there's so much of the way people frame this conversation for years now has been that China is ripping us off because they sell cheap goods. And the way it's been referred to is dumping, that they dump their cheap goods on us. Now, I'm just saying, if you could reduce this back to the individual level of trade, you could see how at least the starting point here does sound kind of ridiculous. Okay, that is what's going on with our trade with China. This is not that China is coming in from the sky and dumping cheap Chinese goods on us. These are American businesses purchasing goods from China.